The sun beat down mercilessly on the dry plains of New Mexico, painting the dust in hues of gold and crimson. Ella, small but fierce, stood with her back straight, though every muscle in her body throbbed with pain. The townsfolk had gathered, their eyes cold and unforgiving, watching her endure the punishment that no one could justify. 100 lash marks traced the curve of her back, each one a reminder of the cruel judgment she had received. They called her barren, a woman without worth, and the weight of their scorn was heavier than any whip. Yet in the center of that merciless square, she refused to break. There was fire in her eyes, a spark that not even relentless pain could extinguish. The town of Redstone was small, but steeped in rigid tradition. The law of the land was not written on paper, but carved into the hearts of its people, where cruelty often masqueraded as justice. Men wielded authority as if it were their birthright, and women were expected to bend and bow, even when it meant sacrificing their dignity. Ella had been born into this harsh world, and her spirit had always clashed with it. Even as the lashes fell, she felt a strange defiance growing inside her defiance that whispered of a life beyond the barbed fences of judgment and fear. Her tormentors, led by a man named Colton Hawk, were satisfied with the spectacle. Colton was a figure whose shadow stretched across the town like a dark omen. His harsh words and cruel glares had shaped the lives of many, yet he seemed incapable of understanding mercy. Around him, the crowd murmured in fearful agreement, convinced that justice was served. But Ella's gaze did not waver. She searched the horizon, the endless stretch of desert and canyon that promised escape if one dared to take it. Somewhere beyond the ridge, she imagined freedom. Somewhere beyond the town, she imagined someone who could see her beyond her pain. The sound of the wind shifted, carrying with it a strange scent, hearth fire, and something wild that stirred memories deep within her. A figure appeared at the edge of the gathering, tall and steady, moving with a quiet confidence that made the restless crowd pause. His name was Tyann, an Apache warrior whose presence seemed to command the wind itself. He'd come from the mountains, his eyes sharp and unreadable, carrying stories of a world that respected strength in ways the town of Redstone could not. He was not a man of words, but each movement spoke volumes. When he looked at Ella, the crowd noticed a change's subtle shift, like the first whisper of a storm on the plains. Ella felt it immediately. Something in Tyann's gaze acknowledged her suffering without judgment. It was the first time in years that anyone had looked at her and seen more than the scars and the label they had forced upon her. There was no pity there, only recognition, a silent promise that the world did not have to end in cruelty. For the first time since the lashes began, she drew a shaky breath that carried more hope than pain. The people of Redstone shifted uneasily, sensing that their authority might be challenged by a presence they did not understand. Tyann stepped closer, his movements deliberate but unhurried. He did not speak to the crowd. He spoke only to her, though his words were carried in gestures and the weight of his gaze. He pointed toward the horizon, toward the wilderness beyond the town. The mountains called, silent and enduring, promising a place where judgment could not follow. Ella's heart raced, torn between the fear of leaving and the lure of freedom. She had been trapped in this small town her entire life, each day a reminder of what she lacked in the eyes of others. Yet in Tyann's presence, she felt the possibility of a future that was hers alone to claim. The town leaders, sensing the tension, moved to block him. Colton Hawk's voice boomed, sharp as a rifle shot. "Step back, stranger. This is not your fight." But Tyann did not flinch. His calm, unwavering stance sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. There was something in his silence that carried authority stronger than any whip, stronger than the years of fear the townsfolk had cultivated. For a moment, the murmurs stopped. The wind carried a warning that the townspeople could not ignore. They knew instinctively that this man was not like the others who had passed through Redstone. He would not bend, would not leave until he had seen the truth. Ella's pulse quickened. She understood, in a way she could not yet explain, that her life might hinge on this moment. Tyann's eyes met hers again, and she saw a challenge there, not for her punishment, but for her destiny. He did not promise safety, only possibility. That was enough. It was the first spark of hope she had felt in years of torment. If she chose to follow, she would leave behind the only life she had ever known, stepping into a wilderness that was as dangerous as it was freeing. The thought terrified her, yet something deep within demanded she listen. Pain had shaped her for this moment, had prepared her for the choice she had to make. Colton Hawk, seeing that his authority was challenged, raised his voice again, his hands trembling with frustration and anger. "You dare interfere? You do not belong here, Apache?" But Taeon did not answer. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of a knife at his belt, a subtle reminder that his presence carried consequences beyond words. The crowd faltered, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. Whispers of the old world, the world of survival, of skill, of honor spread through them. For the first time, they were unsure of what would happen next. Their judgment, so long unquestioned, seemed fragile, like the wind shifting over dry earth. Ella's back ached, but she stood taller than she had in months. The 100 lash marks were raw, but they could not diminish the courage rising in her chest. She had lived under judgment for too long, her body punished for something that was no fault of her own. Yet in that harsh, unforgiving town square, she glimpsed a chance at something new. Taeon's presence promised a different kind of life, one where her strength mattered more than her misfortune. Her fingers clenched the edges of her worn dress, and for the first time, she felt that her choices might shape her fate, not the cruelty of others. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the square, Taehan turned slightly, signaling that the path forward was uncertain but open. Ella's eyes followed him toward the horizon, toward the mountains that rose like guardians over the land. The crowd's murmurs faded into an uneasy silence. Colton Hawk's anger was palpable, but even he could see that the moment had shifted, that the power dynamic had changed in subtle, unspoken ways. Ella felt the pull of destiny, raw and undeniable, beckoning her to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could stay trapped in the cruelty of a town unwilling to see her worth, or she could step forward into the unknown, guided by the quiet strength of an Apache warrior who recognized her as more than the pain she had endured. Her heart pounded as she took the first tentative step toward Taeon. Every fiber of her being screamed caution, but the fire within her surged stronger than her fear. She knew that leaving meant danger, uncertainty, and the weight of choices yet untested. Yet staying meant nothing but continued suffering, a life measured by judgment and scars. And so, with the first light of hope stirring in her chest, Ella moved toward the horizon, toward the mountains, and toward a fate that promised challenge, but also freedom. The wind carried the promise of something bigger, something that would not be bound by the cruelty of Redstone. And somewhere deep inside, she felt the whisper of destiny, calling her forward, demanding that she take the first step into a life yet unwritten. Ella's footsteps were careful on the rocky ground, each one a test of courage and balance. The plains stretched endlessly, a harsh expanse of sand and scrub brush, and yet the emptiness felt like a strange kind of promise. Behind her, the town of Redstone sank lower with every step, its dust rising like ghosts of the life she had left behind. She could still hear faint shouts carried by the wind, but they grew weaker with distance. For the first time in months, the fear that had lived in her chest loosened, replaced by a cautious curiosity about what lay ahead. Taeon moved silently beside her, a shadow of strength and patience. He spoke little, but each gesture was deliberate, guiding her along paths that seemed treacherous to an untrained eye. Ella noticed the way his hands moved over rocks and brush, sensing danger where she would have stumbled blindly. There was a skill in him, a quiet mastery of the land that spoke of years spent surviving where others could not. She wanted to ask him questions, to understand who he was and why he had appeared in her life at this critical moment, but his eyes held a quiet warning. The story of trust could not be rushed. They walked for hours, the sun climbing high, burning the edges of her skin. Ella felt the lash marks on her back throb with every movement, but the pain seemed smaller now, swallowed by the enormity of the journey. Her mind, once clouded with despair, began to remember things long-buried stories her mother had told of distant mountains where rivers ran clear, of a people who valued honor over fear, strength over cruelty. She realized with a start that Taeon was not just a guide, but a living link to that world. And though he had not said it, she could feel that he had chosen her for reasons she could not yet understand. Night fell faster than she expected. The sky bled orange and red, turning to deep purple, before finally surrendering to black. Stars emerged, sharp and cold, illuminating the rugged landscape. Taeon made camp near a small outcrop, the only shelter in the open plain. He gestured for Ella to sit and offered her water from a leather pouch. She accepted silently, feeling a strange sense of security despite the harshness of the land. Around them, the night was alive with sounds: coyotes calling, wind rustling over stones, and the distant rush of a river somewhere hidden in the darkness. Each noise was unfamiliar, yet it reminded her that life existed beyond Redstone, beyond cruelty, beyond judgment. As she sat, Ella dared to look at Tyone more closely. His face was strong, marked by lines of endurance, and eyes that seemed to see not just the world, but the soul within it. There was a quiet intensity in him, the kind that made people follow without being forced. She wondered how many battles he had faced, how many moments of danger had honed the man before her. There was an aura about him that suggested he had been shaped by hardship just as she had, yet his resilience was different. It was calm, controlled, almost like fire contained within stone. Curiosity finally overcame her fear, and she asked, "Why are you helping me? Why did you come here?" Taeyeon's gaze shifted toward the distant horizon. The moon reflected in his eyes, making them seem like twin fires. He did not answer immediately. Then, slowly, he spoke, his voice deep and steady. "Because some injustice cannot stand. Because not all paths are meant to end in suffering. And because strength is wasted when it is hidden." Ella's brow furrowed. His words were cryptic, but they carried a truth that resonated deep within her. She realized that he had seen the cruelty of Redstone, had witnessed what she endured, and had decided that her story did not have to end in defeat. There was no explanation of why fate had brought them together, no promise of safety, yet something in his tone suggested destiny was guiding them, not chance. They slept under the stars, and Ella dreamed of the past.
Ow.
Memories of Redstones squared the shouts, the whip. The cold eyes of her neighbors haunted her, but in the dreams, she also saw possibilities. She imagined running freely across hills and valleys, learning from Taeyeon, mastering skills she had never known she could possess. The scars on her back throbbed even in sleep, but the pain seemed less cruel when paired with hope. She woke to the first light of dawn, the horizon painted with pale gold, and found Taeyeon already awake, observing the land as if it held secrets meant only for him. The next days passed in a rhythm of walking, resting, and learning. Taeyeon showed her how to read the signs of the desert, which plants could nourish, which water sources were safe, which tracks belonged to predators. Ella discovered that she was not as helpless as Redstone had claimed. Her body, though marked by punishment, responded with strength and endurance she had never realized. Each step through the wilderness was a small victory, each survival a quiet defiance against the world that had tried to define her by her suffering. But there were dangers beyond the ordinary. One evening, as they approached a narrow canyon, a figure appeared on a ridge, silhouetted against the fading sun. Taeyeon immediately signaled for silence, his body moving like a shadow, a hunter sensing threat before it arrives. Ella held her breath, her pulse quickening, as the figure revealed itself, a man clad in leather and worn metal, a rifle slung across his back. His face was hard, eyes suspicious and calculating. He did not speak, but his gaze seemed to measure Taeyeon and Ella alike, evaluating them for unknown reasons. Taeyeon's hand rested on his knife again, a silent warning that danger was near. He did not flinch, but Ella could feel the tension in his muscles, the quiet readiness that spoke of years spent in confrontation. They waited, the canyon silent except for the whispering wind as the man considered whether to advance. Ella felt the old fear creeping back, a shadow of the terror she had thought she had left behind. Yet alongside it was a strange thrill to awareness that her choices had consequences, that her journey was no longer one of simple survival, but of confrontation with forces she did not yet understand. The stranger finally turned, disappearing into the shadows of the canyon without a word. Taeyeon did not relax immediately. "Redstone is not the only danger," he said. "Others watch. Some hope to claim what is weak, some wish to test what is strong." Ella's mind raced. She realized that her flight from Redstone had only begun to uncover the larger world, where cruelty and judgment existed in many forms, where survival required vigilance, cunning, and courage. Her past, the lash marks, the whispers of the town were no longer her only trials. She had entered a landscape of unknown rules, where every encounter carried risk, and every choice could determine life or death. And yet, even with the danger, A new resolve grew inside her. She would not be defined by the suffering of Redstone, nor would she allow herself to be ruled by fear. As the days turned into nights, and nights into cautious dawns, Ella learned to trust not only Taeon, but her own instincts. The wilderness became both teacher and challenge, testing her endurance, sharpening her mind, and revealing a resilience she had never known existed. And all the while a question lingered at the edge of her thoughts: why had Taeon chosen her? What force or destiny had brought them together, in the midst of Redstone's cruelty, into the wilderness filled with unseen dangers? Every day carried both risk and revelation. Streams and hidden caves became shelters. Mountainsides provided both challenge and perspective. Ella felt herself transforming, growing stronger, more aware, more alive. Yet the past remained a shadow. She could not forget the pain of Redstone, nor the injustices that had marked her as less than whole. And somewhere, beyond the hills and canyons, she knew that forces both human and otherwise were watching, waiting to challenge the fragile life she was beginning to carve for herself. One night, as the wind carried the scent of distant pine and fire, Ella and Taeon sat beneath a massive rock outcrop, their figures small against the vast sky. Taeon's eyes scanned the horizon, but this time they were softer, reflective. "The world does not bend easily," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It tests us. It judges us. But those who endure may discover what the world cannot take from them." Ella looked at him, her heart heavy but alive. She had endured lashes, judgment, and cruelty, yet she had also discovered strength, hope, and a guide who saw her beyond her scars. The horizon stretched before her, wide and uncertain, promising both danger and freedom. She knew that what lay ahead would test her even more than Redstone, yet for the first time she felt ready. The journey was far from over, and the shadows of the past lingered, but she would walk forward. And somewhere in the vast wilderness, she sensed that fate itself had begun to turn in her favor, though its direction remained a mystery she was yet to understand. And so, under the endless stars and whispering wind, journey continued, a path filled with challenge, discovery, and the unspoken promise that life, no matter how cruel, could still be seized by the courageous. The days that followed were a delicate dance between survival and uncertainty. Ella had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the wilderness, the way Taeon read the signs of the land, and how every step carried the weight of unseen dangers. But the freedom she had tasted was fragile, constantly threatened by forces both visible and hidden. Each morning brought a new test: finding safe water, avoiding predators, navigating paths that could twist into traps. The desert, once barren in her imagination, revealed itself as a living, breathing challenge, full of secrets she had yet to understand. Taeon was a patient teacher, but he revealed only as much as he believed she could handle. He never explained everything, leaving parts of the world veiled in mystery. Ella felt frustration at times, wishing he would speak plainly. Yet she also understood that knowledge carried danger. The stories he told in quiet moments, about the mountains, rivers, and hidden valleys, hinted at struggles and triumphs, but each tale was layered with warnings. He had lived through more than she could imagine, and his past seemed like a shadow that stretched far beyond the present. One evening, as they rested near a small spring hidden in a canyon, Taeon spoke of a place he called Kashina Hollow. His voice was low, carrying a weight that made Ella sit straighter. "Not all who wander these lands find it," he said. "And those who do are not always safe. There are people there who measure strength differently by honor, skill, and choice. The world outside Redstone is not free of cruelty. It is only less predictable." Ella's mind raced. She wondered if this place could be her escape, her chance to belong somewhere that valued her beyond what Redstone had taught her. But the mention of danger reminded her that even here, the wilderness had its perils. She had seen the man on the ridge, the silent stranger whose gaze seemed to test them. She had begun to realize that people often carried agendas as hidden as the mountains themselves. She knew that not every encounter would be friendly, not every path safe. Her trust, fragile and new, was something she would have to guard fiercely. Their next journey brought them through an old canyon, steep walls narrowing their passage. Shadows crept across the rocks, and the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Ella noticed that Taeon's hands were never far from his weapons, his senses alert to the slightest movement. She tried to match his focus, but the tension pressed against her chest like a weight she could not lift. Somewhere in the shadows, she felt the presence of others' watchers, perhaps or hunters. The thought made her pulse quicken. She understood now that the world she had entered was not forgiving, and every choice carried consequences. As they moved cautiously, they came across signs of recent passage footprints, partially washed by dust, the remnants of a fire that had burned too recently to be accidental. Tyon studied the ground silently, and Ella felt a chill as she realized they were not alone. "Someone is nearby," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the ridge above. "They are not friendly." Ella's heart pounded. She had faced judgment in Redstone, endured punishment meant to break her. But the wilderness brought a different fear, one where the consequences were immediate and possibly fatal. She clutched the strap of her pack, trying to steady her trembling hands. Taeon's presence was grounding, but even he could not eliminate the uncertainty. The stranger or strangers watched from a distance, unseen but felt, a reminder that escape did not guarantee safety. The tension of their journey was mirrored in Ella's own thoughts. She remembered the whispers of Redstone, the jeers and cruelty, and realized that fear could follow her even beyond the town. She was learning that survival demanded more than physical endurance. It required understanding, patience, and sometimes cunning that went beyond instinct. Every step, every decision carried the weight of her past and the promise of her future. She could not afford hesitation, yet she also could not act recklessly. Taeon's presence was a constant lesson in balance. He taught her to read the wind, to sense the subtle signs of danger, and to trust her own instincts. Yet he remained enigmatic, revealing only fragments of his own story. Ella caught glimpses of pain in his eyes, memories unspoken, battles fought in silence. She realized that he, too, carried scars invisible to others, and that his strength came not from absence of suffering, but from enduring it. Their bond grew quietly, forged in shared hardship, trust built step by careful step, yet it was tested constantly by the unforgiving landscape and unseen threats. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, they reached a narrow pass that opened onto a plateau. From that vantage point, Ella saw the vast expanse of the wilderness in all directions, the mesas, the winding rivers, and the distant mountains that Taeon had named. The beauty was striking, yet it carried an undercurrent of danger. Taeon stopped, his gaze sharp, and motioned for her to crouch. "There are others ahead," he whispered. "They may be looking for us, or they may simply be passing. We must move carefully." Ella felt the weight of his words. She had known that freedom would not come without trials, but now she understood that escape was only the first step in a longer journey. The world beyond Redstone was unpredictable, full of people whose intentions could shift like wind over the desert. She realized that Taeon's guidance was essential, but that she would need to learn to act independently, to make choices quickly and wisely. Every misstep could bring consequences far greater than the lashes she had endured. As night fell, they camped again, hidden by rocks and brush. Ella watched Taeon move quietly, preparing their small fire and securing their belongings. She noticed the tension in his posture, the way he scanned the darkness repeatedly, a silent acknowledgement that danger might come at any moment. Her own fear was tempered by growing awareness. She was learning the skills of observation, patience, and readiness. Each day in the wilderness sharpened her senses, revealed new truths about the land, and exposed the depth of her own courage. During one quiet moment, Ella dared to ask about Taeon's past. "You've fought many battles," she said softly. "You have scars I cannot see. How did you survive?" Taeon's gaze was distant, focused on the horizon. "Survival is not about avoiding pain," he said. "It is about knowing it, respecting it, and moving through it. The world tests us in ways we cannot always understand. Some pass, some fail. Some learn to walk with the wind, and some are broken by it." Ella listened, absorbing the weight of his words. She realized that her own suffering, the lashes, the judgment, the fear, had not made her weak. They had prepared her for this moment. She had endured cruelty, and now she was learning to endure uncertainty, danger, and the constant challenge of survival. Her strength was growing, not despite her past, but because of it. The next morning brought new tension. As they moved through a dry riverbed, Ella spotted movement ahead, figures dressed in worn leather, mounted on horses, moving swiftly and silently. Taeon crouched low, signaling for her to do the same. The riders were unknown, their faces obscured by scarves and shadow, but their intent was clear. They were searching. Taeyeon's hand rested lightly on his knife, and his eyes met hers. "We are being watched," he said. "They seek something they think we carry. We must not let them find us unprepared." Ella's pulse quickened. The reality of pursuit brought a new layer of fear. The wilderness, once a place of potential freedom, now felt like a trap, its vastness offering no guarantees of safety. She realized that their journey was not just about escaping Redstone, but about navigating a world full of people who would challenge her at every turn. Each encounter carried risk. Each choice could shift the balance between survival and disaster. As the riders drew closer, Ella felt a surge of determination. She had endured the lashings of Redstone, faced the judgment of an entire town, and survived the harsh wilderness alongside Taeyeon. Now, she understood that her path required courage beyond endurance. It required strategy, awareness, and the willingness to confront danger directly. She looked at Taeyeon, ready to follow his lead, yet aware that her own choices would matter more than ever. The canyon narrowed, shadows deepened, and the wind carried the faint sound of hooves. Ella's heart raced, but a strange calm settled over her. She knew the trials ahead would test her in ways she could not yet predict. The past, the wilderness, and the unseen enemies all converged to shape the next stage of her journey. And somewhere in the depths of the night, under the endless stars, she felt a whisper of destiny, a sense that the path she had chosen was only the beginning, and that the true challenge, the one that would define her life, was yet to come. The canyon seemed endless, twisting like a maze carved by time and wind. Ella moved with careful precision, her senses sharpened by days of survival alongside Taeyeon. Every sound, every flicker of shadow made her heart race. Yet she had learned to control her fear, to let it guide her instead of overwhelm her. Taeyeon led the way, silent and alert, eyes scanning every ridge, every crevice. The pursuit that had begun with the riders now felt more immediate. The wilderness offered no hiding places for long, and each step carried the weight of unseen eyes. Ella's back ached from the constant strain, both from the lingering memory of Redstone's lashes and the effort of navigating the rugged terrain. Her muscles burned, but her determination burned brighter. She had come too far to falter now. Every lesson Taeyeon had taught her the reading of tracks. The subtle warnings in the wind, the signs of water and shelter was now being tested to its limit. She realized that survival was no longer enough. They needed strategy, foresight, and courage beyond what she had ever imagined. The sun began to dip behind jagged peaks, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the canyon floor. Taeyeon stopped suddenly, crouching low, and Ella instinctively mirrored him. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Two figures on horseback, following a parallel path through the canyon. They were careful, deliberate, yet there was no doubt in Ella's mind that their intent was hostile. Her pulse quickened. "They are closing in," Taeyeon murmured, his voice steady but urgent. "We cannot outrun them forever. We must find the pass through the Black Mesa. It is narrow, hidden, and only those who know it can navigate safely. But it will test you more than anything yet." Ella's stomach tightened. Every fiber of her being screamed that the journey would grow more dangerous, yet she nodded, trusting Taeyeon's judgment. The pass was their only chance, the narrow gap between life and capture. But to reach it, they would have to move quickly, silently, and with precision. One misstep could expose them to the riders, and the consequences of capture were unthinkable. They advanced cautiously, Taeyeon leading with an almost imperceptible rhythm, guiding her through rocky outcrops and shallow gullies. Ella felt the sweat on her brow, tasted the dust on her lips, and breathed the thin, dry air with effort. Every step demanded focus. Every shadow required scrutiny. The riders behind them were patient hunters, skilled and relentless, their presence a constant pressure that tightened around Ella's chest like a vice. As they neared a narrow opening between two cliffs, Taeyeon motioned for her to pause. "We must wait for the moment when the wind shifts," he said quietly. "We'll carry your scent, your movement. The wrong moment, and they will find us." Ella crouched low, heart pounding as she felt the wind brush across her skin, carrying the scent of the wilderness and the danger that lurked beyond. Time seemed to stretch, the seconds lingering with unbearable intensity. The flicker of movement below told her the riders were aware of something, but unsure of what. She felt a shiver of both fear and anticipation. Survival was no longer about endurance, it was about action at precisely the right moment. When Tyann finally signaled, they moved with deliberate speed, slipping through the narrow pass like shadows, the cliffs shielding them from view. Ella's lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but the thrill of escape spurred her forward. For the first time, she felt the full weight of her own courage. She realized that the punishment she had endured, the cruelty of Redstone, the constant tests of the wilderness all had prepared her for this critical moment. The pass narrowed further, forcing them to move in single file. Every sound echoed off the rocks, magnifying the risk of discovery. Ella's hands brushed the stone walls, her fingers tracing the rough surface as if seeking guidance from the land itself. Tyann moved ahead, silent and precise, his presence both reassuring and demanding. She trusted him implicitly, yet she also understood that her own choices could determine whether they succeeded or failed. Suddenly, a sharp cry rang out from below. The riders had discovered their trail. Ella froze, heart pounding as the sound of hooves thundered closer. Tyann's hand gripped hers briefly, a silent warning and encouragement. "Now," he whispered, and they surged forward, slipping through the final gap of the pass. The canyon opened onto a plateau, wide and exposed, with the fading light casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Ella felt a mixture of relief and tension. They had reached the plateau, but the danger was far from over. The riders were still behind, their presence a constant threat. Tyann's eyes scanned the horizon, and Ella sensed the urgency in his movements. They needed to find shelter, a vantage point, and a way to turn the tables on those who pursued them. Every instinct screamed that this moment would define the outcome of their journey. As they advanced across the plateau, Ella noticed movement at the far edge, a figure standing alone, watching them. The figure's stance was calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in the way they observed. Ella felt a shiver of uncertainty. Who was this stranger, friend or foe? The possibilities churned in her mind, each one more dangerous than the last. Tyann approached cautiously, and the stranger did not move, only watching. Ella's breath caught as the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and earth, mingling with the tension that hung thick in the air. She realized that every choice they made in the next moments could determine life or death, the wilderness, the riders, and now this unknown presence created a complex web of danger that demanded courage, skill, and quick thinking. Night fell quickly, and with it, a heavy silence. The plateau became a stage for unseen forces, each sound amplified in the darkness. Tyann set up a minimal camp behind a cluster of rocks, positioning them so they were hidden from view, yet had a clear line of sight. Ella helped quietly, her mind sharp, her body tense with anticipation. Every rustle of brush, every distant cry, made her ready to act. She had learned to rely on Tyann's instincts, but she also knew that she must be ready to act independently if the moment demanded it. As they rested, Ella's thoughts returned to Redstone, the judgment, the lashes, the scorn. She realized that those memories were no longer chains but fuel. They had forged her resilience, her courage, and her ability to survive under extreme pressure. Yet she also knew that survival alone would not ensure victory. The forces arrayed against them, the riders, the unknown stranger, the harshness of the land would demand more than endurance. They would demand ingenuity, timing, and an understanding of the world that went beyond instinct. The hours of night dragged on, heavy with anticipation. Every shadow seemed to move, every whisper of wind carried hidden messages. Ella felt the tension coiling. Tighter in her chest, a mixture of fear, determination, and the strange exhilaration of being on the edge of something monumental. Tyann remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the plateau, body poised like a predator ready to strike. She realized that he, too, carried a burden of knowledge, understanding more about the dangers surrounding them than he revealed. His calmness was a lesson in control, but it also hinted at the gravity of the challenges that awaited them. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Elizaja's shadow near the distant ridge, subtle and deliberate. Her heart leaped. The riders? The stranger? She could not tell, yet the presence of an observer added a new layer of urgency. She tightened her grip on the small knife at her belt, feeling the pulse of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Dahun noticed her tension and gave a slight nod, acknowledging both her awareness and her readiness. They were not alone, and every decision from this point forward could change the course of their fate. As the wind shifted again, carrying faint sounds from the canyon below, Ella felt the rising surge of anticipation that only comes when the climax of a story nears. She understood that they were on the brink, their skills, courage, and trust would soon be tested like never before. The riders, the unknown observer, and the harsh wilderness were converging toward a moment that demanded action, courage, and clarity. Ella's mind raced. She thought of Taeyeon's words about Kashina Hollow, about strength and honor and the lessons of the past days. She realized that the journey had been more than survival, it had been preparation for the decisive moments ahead. Every step, every choice, every ounce of endurance had been shaping her for this moment, and she felt a fierce determination to face whatever came with courage and clarity. As the night deepened, the plateau seemed suspended in time, the tension almost tangible. Shadows shifted across the rocks, and the distant sounds of pursuit carried through the darkness. Ella's pulse raced, her senses heightened, and she understood that the climax of their journey was near. Every instinct, every lesson, and every ounce of courage she had cultivated would soon be tested. The unknown forces surrounding them, the harsh wilderness, and the past she had endured were converging in a moment pregnant with danger, suspense, and the promise of a new beginning. Ella looked at Taeyeon, their eyes meeting in shared understanding. They were ready. The first light of dawn spilled across the plateau, turning the rocks to gold and the distant mountains to pale violet. Ella stirred, muscles stiff from tension and a restless night, yet her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The threat of the riders, the stranger, and the unknown forces of the wilderness had loomed over them all night. But the darkness had passed, leaving only a fragile sense of hope. Taeyeon moved silently beside her, eyes still sharp, scanning the horizon as if expecting danger at every moment. Yet in his posture there was a quiet relief, an acknowledgement that the worst of the chase was behind them. Ella took a deep breath, tasting the crisp morning air. The plateau stretched endlessly, but unlike the first time she had seen it, it no longer felt like a trap. It was a landscape of possibility. Each ridge, each canyon, each shadowed path held the promise of freedom, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of that promise settle over her. She looked at Taeyeon and saw more than a guide. She saw a partner in survival, someone who had seen her worth beyond the scars, beyond the judgment, beyond the lashes that had once defined her. They began to move down the slope toward a river valley that wound like a silver ribbon through the desert. The water glimmered in the early light, a sign of life and safety after the long, harsh nights. As they descended, Ella's thoughts turned to Redstone. She realized that the town, the cruelty, the punishment, and the shame had been part of her past, but they no longer had power over her. The lashes on her back were scars, but they were also proof of endurance, proof that she had survived the unthinkable and emerged stronger. Taeyeon broke the silence first. "We are close to Kashina Hollow," he said quietly. His voice carried a note of reverence, and Ella felt a thrill of anticipation. It is a place where the land itself tests those who enter, but also rewards courage and strength. If we are careful, we can find shelter, food, and a place to rest without fear of pursuit. Ella's heart lifted. She had survived the harshest trials of both Redstone and the wilderness, and now she stood on the threshold of a sanctuary she had once only imagined. Yet she also understood that Kashina Hollow was not a guarantee. It was a reward for the brave and the persistent, a place where survival and courage were tested in subtle ways. She felt a renewed determination. She would not falter now, not when she had come so far. As they approached the river, movement on the far bank caught her eye. A figure emerged from the trees, a woman, tall and strong, with eyes that seemed to pierce the distance. Ella instinctively tensed, ready for confrontation, but the woman's expression was calm, almost welcoming. Taeyeon slowed, giving a subtle nod. "She is the guardian of this place," he said. "Do not be afraid. She knows who we are, and she will judge only by truth and courage." Ella stepped forward cautiously. The woman studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "I come far," she said, her voice strong and steady. Not many survive what you have endured, and still carry the fire within. Ella felt warmth spread through her chest, a sense of recognition she had not known since childhood. For the first time, someone looked at her and saw not her pain, but her strength. They were led to a hidden grove where water ran clear and plants grew in abundance. Kashina Hollow was alive in ways the wilderness outside had never been. It offered safety, sustenance, and a sense of belonging. Ella knelt by the river, cupping the cool water in her hands. She tasted it and felt a wave of relief, a signal that she had not only survived, but was beginning a new chapter. Taeyeon stood beside her, quiet and watchful, yet she could see pride in his eyes. He had guided her through danger, but the journey was also hers. Every step she had taken, every choice she had made, had brought them here. Over the next days, they settled into the hollow. Ella learned the rhythms of this hidden place, discovering food, shelter, and even ways to navigate the surrounding wilderness safely. The guardian, whose name was Ahuli, shared wisdom about the land and the balance required to thrive. Ella felt herself growing not just physically, but emotionally. She realized that freedom was not simply escape from Redstone. It was the ability to live with purpose, to honor her strength, and to find community among those who valued it. As Ella grew stronger, she reflected on Taeyeon's quiet lessons. He had taught her not only survival, but courage, patience, and awareness. She had learned to trust herself, to move with the land, and to anticipate danger without being ruled by fear. Her bond with Taeyeon deepened, built not only on necessity, but on shared respect and understanding. They spoke rarely, but their communication was complete through gestures, glances, and shared experience. Ella realized that in the harsh wilderness, words were sometimes unnecessary when trust had been forged in fire. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Taeyeon and Ella sat together near the riverbank. "You have changed," he said softly. "Not just because of what you endured, but because of what you chose to do with it. Strength is not measured in scars or survival alone. It is measured in the courage to continue when every choice carries risk." Ella looked at him, understanding in her heart the depth of his meaning. She had survived Redstone, the pursuit, the wilderness, and now she had found a place where her life could belong to her. Yet she also knew that the journey had shaped her in ways she could not have anticipated. The peace of the hollow was a stark contrast to the terror and judgment she had endured. Yet even here, there were lessons to be learned. She realized that the world beyond the town and the mountains was unpredictable, full of forces she might never fully control. But she had learned that courage, determination, and awareness could shape her fate in ways she had never imagined. The scars on her back, once symbols of shame, were now badges of endurance. They told a story of survival, growth, and the power of choice. Over time, Ella became a part of the hollow, respected for her resilience, skill, and wisdom. The guardians and inhabitants recognized her strength, not as something earned through punishment, but as something inherent, forged through both suffering and courage. Taeyeon remained at her side, their bond unspoken but undeniable. Together, they navigated challenges, learned the secrets of the land, and discovered a rhythm of life that balanced risk and freedom, danger and safety. The days turned to weeks, and the hollow became a place of renewal. Ella reflected often on her journey, the cruelty of Redstone, the pursuit through the wilderness, the unknown threats that had tested her courage. She realized that every trial had prepared her for this life, a life where she could define her own path, honor her own strength, and live without fear of judgment. The lessons of the past were no longer burdens. They were guides, shaping her choices and strengthening her resolve. One afternoon, as she stood at the edge of the river watching the sun's reflection dance on the water, Ella felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had survived not because the world had been kind, but because she had chosen to face it with courage, resilience, and determination. The hollow Taeyeon and the guardians had offered safety and knowledge, but it was her strength that had brought her here. She realized that true freedom was not simply escape from cruelty, but the ability to live fully, with awareness, purpose, and hope. As evening fell, Ella and Taeyeon stood together on a rocky ledge overlooking the hollow. The wind carried the scent of pine and water, and the sky blazed with the colors of sunset. "The journey is never truly over," Taeyeon said quietly. "But those who endure and choose wisely find strength, hope, and life worth living. Ella nodded, understanding the truth in his words. She had endured cruelty, fear, and uncertainty, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the life before her. In the quiet that followed, Ella felt a sense of peace she had never known. The lashes, the judgment, and the fear of red stone were distant memories, replaced by the promise of a life shaped by courage and choice. The hollow, the river, the mountains, and Taeon's guidance were part of a new chapter, one of freedom, resilience, and hope. And though challenges would surely come, Ella knew she had the strength, skill, and courage to face them. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. She had survived, endured, and grown. The past was a story of strength, the present a life reclaimed, and the future a horizon full of possibility. She glanced at Taeon, gratitude and trust reflected in her eyes, and felt the quiet joy of knowing that she was no longer defined by what others thought of her, but by her own courage, choices, and heart. The wind carried the whispers of the hollow, the river sang softly, and the mountains stood eternal. Ella had found her place in the world, not because cruelty had ended, but because she had discovered strength, freedom, and the courage to claim her destiny. And in that moment she knew that life, no matter how harsh, could be transformed by resilience, determination, and the power of hope. Ella's journey ended not with the punishment of Redstone, but with triumph over fear, vindication of her spirit, and the discovery of a life defined by courage, freedom, and hope. She had endured, she had learned, and she had grown in the world. Vast and challenging as it was, now held endless possibility.